Okay, cool.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. Let me start by introducing the panel that shares the stage with me, and then I'll make a few opening comments. So with me, immediately to my left, is Ed Hoffman, who is the NASA Chief Knowledge Officer and Apple Director. Next to Ed is David Radcliffe, who is a professor and head of the School of Engineering Education at Purdue. And next, known to everyone, of course, is Lee Nicolai, emeritus member of the Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Company, the Skunk Works. And finally, we have Kate Stambaugh, who was Space Systems Engineer at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory. I think we sit at a fairly fortunate time in the schedule this week because so many of the sessions that we've had earlier during the week, for example, the one that Jim had a couple of days ago, obviously the introductory remarks that were given by the keynote by Dan Mote, have done a lot to set the stage for where we go here today. And of course, if you talk about professional education, continuing education, whatever term you want to use, maintaining the workforce, etc., you can go in a lot of different directions. And at the end of the day, it's all about, to answer the problem that was so well defined by what Dan had just presented us, it's really about attracting talent, developing it, and then retaining it. And so as a steering committee for the conference, and this panel discussed this, we decided on a specific direction that we could go during the dialogue this morning. And I do very much want it to be a dialogue amongst not only the panel, but amongst everyone in this room. But if you look at this larger issue of how one attracts, develops, and retains talent, I would say that in some areas we've certainly made a lot of effort. We could certainly have a long debate about how successful it's been. But if you think over the last 20 years, we've made tremendous efforts in trying to improve the situation of education in K through 12. Trying to give a focus towards perhaps more interest in science and engineering and how you end up being able to attract more children that are bright and motivated into engineering as opposed into other disciplines. More recently, thanks to efforts from folks like, for example, David and colleagues like him across the country, we've made efforts in trying to make sure that the number of students who start engineering finish engineering. I think most of us in this room remember starting in our freshman year and having someone in a large auditorium say, look to the left, look to the right, only one of you is going to finish. And perhaps not everyone who starts in engineering should finish. Maybe they don't have all the skills that it takes, but maybe the numbers were too high for arbitrary reason of folks who did not complete. But one area that's had very little attention, I think, is vastly important to us all. If you look at the statistics, the number of engineers that finish school in engineering and then start their career as engineers and within 5 years leave is sadly quite high. And it's really not an issue. Particularly in my case, I don't really care if someone leaves Lockheed and goes to Boeing, if they leave us and go to Ford or Intel. But what really troubles me deeply in light of where the nation goes is when people leave the field of engineering at any one of these employers, a company, a university, a government laboratory of some form, and they become a financial advisor, they run a restaurant, or whatever else it might be, where they just give up on engineering. And unfortunately, the number of students that give up on engineering in that first 5 years of their career is highest amongst females and minorities, which is the large pool of population for which our future talent will have to come over the course of the coming decades. So a lot of the focus of the dialogue today will be, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that our young professionals are getting the right kind of fulfillment out of their careers to make sure that they stay and continue to contribute for the many decades as many of us in this room have had the opportunity to do. And I'm glad to see that there have been a number of professional societies, AIAA being one of the most proactive, that has turned attention to young professionals. The Young Leaders program that we've had this week, for example, is a good example of that. But what we can do with an AIAA, for example, is I think just a start of this entire problem. So our focus today is going to be on those young professionals and what are the things that we can do to make sure that we give them fulfilling careers so that they can replace those of us when we leave the workforce and continue to drive the U.S. forward as a premier nation in science and engineering. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ed, for your comments.
Okay. So I know that I've always believed that the people who know about any topic are the people who are living it. So by definition, Kate is probably the only one who really knows kind of the answer to what was set up here. But I'll give a starting point. Several years ago, actually, I was giving a talk at NASA. I'm the NASA Chief Knowledge Officer, and we were doing one of our project management challenges. And at the end of a talk, I had a young woman. She was in her 20s, had only been at NASA a few years. And she said, how do you become successful at NASA? And I started giving different, and she said, no, I mean, how do you really become successful? I'm not talking about what it says in the books or anything like that. And I thought it was an interesting question. We talked about it, and then I spent the next number of years, including today, talking and collecting research from people who have been successful in terms of their work. And I come to the conclusion, I talk now at NASA about the 4 A's. The 4 A's. I'll be speaking later today at the Goddard Space Flight Center in a program for folks who are working project science, and I'll talk to them about that. And the 4 A's in terms of success are ability, assignments, alliances, and attitudes. And a couple of them I think we've always done well. NASA's always done well. I think Aerospace has always done well with communicating the importance of ability, talent, smarts, competency. By definition, the folks who come to the organization have a lot of education, a lot of schooling. But one of the key issues in that area is how do we support that? You know, when I started at NASA 30 years ago, I think there was more of a sense that you got educated and then basically you were there for life. And nowadays, with technologies changing every 3 months and politics changing every 5 minutes and strategies, I mean, all these things enter into ability. How do we continue the learning and making that important? The assignments, I think, are a key separation point, because in watching people at NASA, what I've seen is that those who've been most successful, either they had a plan or they got into the fact that work gets more work, and there's nothing that replaces hands-on. Totally clear. So if you want a career and if you want folks who are talented, do we give people the hands-on engineering, project, science work? And if we don't have the work, then I think we have to consider why are we trying to attract people to the field. Sometimes I think we focus a lot on the education, on the training, on the courses, on getting people with the degrees, but we don't spend enough time saying, does this industry, does NASA have future projects that are worthy? I don't think there's a surprise that during the Apollo era there was a significant ramp up in terms of science, technology, engineering. People get turned on by the opportunities. That's what draws people to the field. I think the other two things I know at NASA historically we haven't focused as much on. The attitude is, can you work well with others? 90% of NASA's work is done by industry, as everyone on here knows. Over 80% of our missions are international collaborations. Although the engineering community probably wouldn't want to acknowledge it, ultimately NASA and Aerospace is about science, and so we're doing work for scientists and universities. So this is a strange community of people who have to come together. And there are people who probably wouldn't normally come together in a party, and yet they have to come together to work. And so what I've seen is where people's careers stop, it's usually the attitudinal component. People get a reputation for not being able to work together. So what do we do to honestly talk about that as opposed to ignoring it? And then I think the final one is the alliances. What do we do to make it easier for people to build their networks? Every day working a project or an engineering issue is a day where you have a problem. The most successful people, they have a network of who they can call, as well as being able to Google it and find it. But mostly they have a network. And so in an environment where it becomes frowned upon to support conferences or to support travel, or where the dollar becomes more important than chances for people to come together, I think those are some of the key issues that we gotta watch for. So those are, I think, the personal responsibilities I tell people. Make sure you have the ability, you maintain it. Make sure you're getting the work, the assignments, the hands-on, training won't get it done. You got to have the work, and you have to have the attitude of respect and inclusion, and you have to really have a network. You have to have alliances. Organizationally, I think we need to do the things that support those, and sometimes that goes up against political or budgetary kind of conventions. So.
Thank you, Ed. David?
Thank you. Good morning. I want to pick up on the direction theme that Dan had, and let me talk about the direction we had in the Cold War and then the 21st century. So, Cold War, the metaphor we had for careers was very much the pipeline. Education was K to 16, a continuum. You enter, you get educated, you go and earn. Long lead times, we talk about the leaky pipeline. It was a very linear, pre-planned sort of set of learning things, very stage-gate. It was teacher-centric, the curriculum was set, the syllabi was set, time-based, based on instruction hours, credit hours, and all those good things. We talked about, well, we still do, I guess, about career ladders. You got selected on your qualifications, you had a fairly logical career development, siloed knowledge, sort of sideways movement was seen as a negative. So we had, or still have, I guess, engaged professionals who follow fairly defined careers subject to opportunities. The 21st century is really more about pathways rather than a pipeline. So there are many entry points, many re-entry points, many ways to get to a certain point, shorter lead times. It's going to be a much more agile system. It's going to be much more non-linear, contingent learning type approaches, very custom learning, just in time, built around the individuals, much more learner-centric, learner-controlled, in fact. And it's going to have, we're going to have career lattice rather than a career ladder. So you move sideways, you jump, you go out of a career, come back in. So to the point about women and minorities in the go, there'll be more opportunities to come and go and not have to follow up the greasy pole, so to speak. We'll have mass career customization, we believe our friends at Deloitte. And so we'll have much more sort of passionate, self-aware professionals, individuals who are much more in charge of their own career journey, and it's going to be in a network place. Let me just say something about how that might kick off. I believe universities increasingly will be going to more competency-based degrees. In other words, what employers have been looking for, still look for, is about what can you do, how can you action the knowledge you have, not what piece of paper do you have. So I think we're going to move in that direction. And where also prior learning will count. You'll meet the student wherever they're coming from. So it's not lockstep, it's not 4 years, it's not bang, bang, bang down the curriculum. And you'll look at specialized knowledge and integrative knowledge and other intellectual skills and civic knowledge and so forth. But I hear you say, those of you who know about ABET and accreditation and EC 2000, didn't we go to an outcomes-based curriculum? No, not really. We're still aspiring towards that, but we're going to do that seriously. But I'll just put up one word of caution about competency-based. I've done some research on the area, and there's the thing we came across, what I'd call accidental competency. So there's lots of things at the moment. We try to design a curriculum around what industry wants. We try aspirationally towards outcomes-based, but there's often things that happen in the curriculum that we don't design in, but are actually very useful learning. So for example, running all-nighters and doing things like that are not integrally part of the curriculum for which you get credit, but in fact, they allow you to build some of the abilities that you actually use. So be careful about designing a curriculum. It's not a simple linear process. And the work of Reid Hoffman, who was one of the PayPal mafia, his book out on the startup of you is a really interesting idea that in fact all of us are really a startup company. Each individual's career is a startup. We're all reinventing ourselves. We're all in permanent beta mode. That has been the case. It's not just the 21st century, but it's going to become the norm, I think. If I leave with two thoughts about how universities and industry might sort of work together around the talent issue. The first one's more about the talent and the firms directly. So as we're going to be focusing more on not just hiring people to fit the job, but hiring talent and working out how we can use that talent. In other words, the work follows the talent more than the talent following the work. And it's about mentoring, it's about coaching, it's about learning trajectories. In fact, organization is going to be more about communities of mutuality. In other words, the engineer who wanted to start the restaurant will now want to work in this organization because it's going to take them to where they want to go next, which will allow that organization to do certain sorts of work, much more self-organized, clustered. And to the university's industry, one of the interesting things in our board of our Industrial Advisory Council, we came up with is universities are global entities. We saw in the talk that Dan gave. At Purdue, something like a quarter of our undergraduate students are international students. So, and faculty and other people come from all over. Companies are global. Companies have an issue that, well, I can't hire these students that are coming to your institution because they're international students and we don't have the visas and da-da-da-da-da. But a couple of our Industrial Advisory Board members have appreciated that, well, they work in China and India. So if they can get their organization in those countries to give summer internships to our students who are from those countries, can then hire them, then we can both be global and we can see this in a total global picture. And think about that. The other thing is the idea of internships for full credit. I ran a program in Australia in the mining industry where you spent a year, nearly spent a year, on site in a company. But you're actually getting full credit, not so you were getting both the experiential learning and extracting the deeper knowledge out of that. And so we need to think of interesting and collaborative ways where we can align the interests of the two parties. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. So, Lee?
Okay. I have framed my remarks based upon about 30 years of mentoring young engineers. And of particular interest was why they stayed and why they left the engineering community, why they left industry. And so I'm going to share with you my remarks, and these are my very own. My remarks are aimed at the managers of industry that are out in the audience. So I want you to power down your laptop, pick up your crayon, and start taking notes. And I'm talking to you, Al, and I'm talking to Jennifer. And this is an inside joke, and I can get away with it since I'm retired. But the reasons that are cited by young engineers or engineers in general for leaving industry are: the first one, the work is not exciting, challenging, or fun. If they are having fun, you got them. They're not going to leave. It's when the work is not challenging, exciting, and they're not having fun that you have to worry about them. The second reason is that they do not get a warm fuzzy that their company is supportive of their professional development. They perceive a message coming from the company management that the company is more interested in cutting costs than developing them professionally. Third, they do not have a confidant that they can lay their concerns and criticisms on the table and know that those complaints and concerns will be conveyed up to the company management, that they will be heard. Now, if these three factors or reasons are present, then they're going to give you a whole host of more reasons. They're going to say that they're unhappy with the salary. That's not really true, because engineers, or the kids come into engineering to create something that never was, to design and build a product for the benefit of mankind. They do not come into the profession to make money. If they want to make money, they'd do something else. Pump gas, make hamburgers, or something like that. So they're only telling you about the salary when they don't have the fun and the support of their management and a confidant. They'll also tell you that they're not happy with the location, but that's not true. If they're really having fun, they're happy with the location because that's where the fun is. Now, the family may have problem with the location. The family may not like Palmdale, but that's not the real issue. They'll also tell you that there is a lack of recognition. But if they're having fun and they're developing professionally, the recognition will take care of itself. They'll also tell you that the work hours are not flexible. And once again, if they're having fun and they're developing professionally, they'll give you 120 hours. They'll be thinking about their job on the way to work, on the way home from work, over the weekend. They'll just give you all the time in the world. So that one doesn't hold water. They'll also perhaps tell you that they don't respect the management. And that's just really a cop-out. Because if they're having fun and they're developing professionally, the management must be doing something right. Now, I'd like to come back and elaborate on the fun factor and the professional development and the confidant. The fun factor is the work has to be exciting to them, challenging, and it has to be fun. Before we started tonight, I asked Kate if she was having fun at JPL. She jumped up and down and said yes. So I don't worry about you, Kate. You're not part of my argument here, because you're going to stay with the JPL.
APL, but
APL, whoever, it doesn't matter.
It's another acronym somewhere out there.
The second one, if the engineer perceives that the company is not really supporting him or her professionally, then he's going to be really unhappy. Now, it is the priority of the AIAA to make venues available for professional development. Things like short courses, workshops, educational material, technical conferences like this. Make these available. And then it's incumbent upon the industry to make the travel budget and the training budget available so that the engineers can come to these conferences and take advantage of these things. At the same time, industry has to provide internal training, which means training budget. And they have to provide for tuition reimbursement for advanced education. And the perception that the engineer gets as to the training budget, the travel budget, and the tuition reimbursement is a powerful message that industry has to convey to the engineer. Then the third is the confidant or mentor or whatever you want to call him. But the young engineer has to be able to have a high regard and have a caring mentor that he can confide in, that he can express very candidly his feelings. Is he having fun? Is he worried about the company commitment for career development of his profession? He has to know that it's going to be there. If it's not, then he's going to be concerned about that. So this is the bottom line. If you want to retain your engineering community, you need to make the job fun. You need to commit to a strong and very generous, liberal professional development program. And then you have to provide a confidant that can track the engineer's fun meter and his view of his professional development. Thank you.
Thank you, Lee. So finally, we have Kate Stambaugh. The reason we asked Kate to join us was because lots of folks, like the previous speakers, including myself, have given our view of what we think it takes to motivate young folks. We thought it would be interesting to see what the young folks think it takes for us to do to motivate them. and make them enjoy their careers in engineering. So Kate?
All right, I'm going to do my best to represent all of the students and young professionals in the audience. If I say something that is different from your experience, feel free to come up and talk to me afterwards. This panel is not a one and done, let's move on type of thing. It's an ongoing discussion and dialogue all across the industry, and so it takes advocates from both sides. We need advocates from the top trying to improve the education and training, but then we have to advocate for ourselves too. So feel free, I love talking to people, come up afterwards and talk to me. So I've been in the industry almost 5 years. I came straight out of undergrad, and looking back, I'm not sure how I got hired because I now know so much more than I knew. And a lot of it is from coming to conferences and seeing what's out there. All I knew when I started was, I want to do space. I want to work in the space industry. Space is really cool. And then I came to conferences and I realized there's a lot more to it than just space. So people in undergrad don't say, I want to be in missile defense, or I want to do national security, denied access. We just don't even know what the options are. So when you're hiring, you want to hire the best minds, hire the people with potential and with talent, recognizing that they may not be the ones who stay in that position or that company their entire career. But if you can influence them early and put them where they want to be, you'll have happy engineers. And before I forget, Lee said something about we want to have fun. And fun does not necessarily mean we need to be building robots and it needs to be shiny and all that all the time. For me, some of the most fun projects I've worked on so far have been the ones where I've been the most challenged. And actually, APL does a lot of really cool projects. And the one that I've had the most fun on was when you step back and look at the technology and what it was trying to do, it wasn't the most exciting, but it was the one where I was offered the most challenge and the most responsibility early. And they said, figure it out. We have confidence that you can do that. And that trust, building that trust and saying, it's okay to try and not giving me all the answers, that's what encourages us to grow. But it is a real problem if you have to choose between, I think I can only ask for one thing this year. Should I go do this technical training or should I go to a conference? They're vastly different skills that you gain out of each thing. They're both very important, and it's getting to the point with all the budget cuts that I'm afraid to ask for more than one thing a year, and that's a problem. If you have any young person who comes up to you and is actively asking to go to training or to go to a conference, you should say yes. You should, even if budgets are tight, find a way, because of all of the young people you have, not all of them are going to ask. Of all of your employees, you're at your board meetings, your staff meetings, 100% of the people aren't asking to do training all the time. If they're taking the initiative to come up and say, I really want to further myself, I want to improve my skills, I want to grow my network, I want to learn more about our industry as a whole, you should be thrilled and jump on that and really encourage them to grow. So there's a twofold problem going on of people, you want to keep people within your company and your company, keeping your company strong, but we also want to keep the engineers in this industry. And so when we first start and we don't really know exactly what we want to do and where we want our career to go, it's helpful to have people show us the way and say, well, this is what our company does and it may not be the best long-term fit. Here are some of your other options. Let me introduce you to those people. They may talk to them and find out that that's really not a good fit either, and now this stuff has grown on me. But we don't know what we don't know yet, and we need help. We need the opportunities to learn what else is out there and to grow through challenges technologically in our jobs. So I'll start with that.
Thank you, Kate. What I'd like to do is there were a couple of threads that I heard throughout this conversation. I'd like to pull on those couple of threads first. Then I have some questions that came from the audience, so you certainly can submit cards, and we can also use the microphones if you just wish to go to, I think I can see in the glare of the light here, 2 of them that are out in the middle part of the room. So let me just start with a couple of threads that I heard in different language but come from most, if not all, of our speakers. One was this notion of good work, fun work, rewarding work, etc. The second thing I heard had to do with professional participation, going to meetings, trainings, and the like. And the final one was, I'll just use the single word mentorship for how the earlier generations can work to help the younger ones fulfill their career. But let me start with the fun, challenging work first and ask Lee and David and Ed, what sorts of things have you put in place in your places of employment that have tried to ensure that there is in fact a selection of good challenging work that we can use for our new engineers? So I think I'll start, David, we'll start in the middle, the university.
Well, again, I go back to some of the projects that are out there, the motivation that students have for service learning. So at Purdue, we have a thing called EPICS, which is Engineering Projects and Community Service. And that's to go and do a real project with real clients where you don't know what it is, you're working with those folks and you're helping solve their problem. That is such a deep motivator. And doing something that's clearly of value. So it's about meaning. I would add the word, it's not just fun. Is it meaningful work? Is what I'm doing of significance in the world? That's what we try to do with the students. That's what they are wanting, meaningful things.
Great. Ed?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we benefit at NASA is that people mentor, very assertively. There's a lot of that goes on. I think if you spoke to most people, they would point to different mentors as a part of the environment. One of the interesting programs that we did in terms of learning is called HOPE, Hands-On Project Experience. And it's run like an actual project. There's a competition that will take place. It's done with, in this case, with the Science Mission Directorate that will indicate what the parameters they're looking for. The different centers will compete. They can put together teams that are NASA, that are industry. They have to fit a certain cost, and then for a year when they're selected, they run the actual project. The number one objective, though, is the learning. We keep that in mind by supporting training and development of that. But then the second is ideally would like the project to be successsul. But it's learning by doing actual work. And one of the things that we get from people at the end of the year, we have some people saying, "Man, I didn't realize doing this projects would be so consuming, take so much time," and then they start getting a better sense of maybe what they want to do with their lives. So,
Lee?
I think it's absolutely critical that every young engineer in your organization have a mentor. And that mentor should meet with your young engineer at least once a month. And there should be a charge number for it. At Lockheed Aero, we have a charge number. It's called the mentoring zone. And it accommodates meeting with the young engineer about once a month for an hour, hour and a half. And it's important. And what the mentor should ask of the young engineer as soon as he comes in the room is, "Are you having fun?" And if the young engineer says yes, okay, then you talk about career progression, the football game last Saturday, hobbies, all sorts of things, because he's in good shape. If he says he's not having fun, then the red flag should go up, and you should listen carefully. You should ask him, "Why aren't you having fun?" You should write it down, and you should send that up to your management, and they should put together a plan to make things different, to change things. That's my put on it.
Okay, Kate, one of the things I would observe about many of the topics that we've talked about, including good work, is that things really are two-way streets. So there's certainly a responsibility of the management to try to move good work towards all engineers, young and otherwise. But I think there's also a certain responsibility upon the engineer to make sure that they stay alert and pay attention and move towards places where they think they can make a contribution that they would enjoy. What's your experience been around being able to move towards work that you see out there where you might be the aggressor, if you will, in trying to get an assignment on that project?
I think not enough young people realize how readily available those opportunities are if you're just willing to ask. And even if you don't necessarily want to get onto a specific project, you just want to learn more about it, a lot of organizations have a very open door policy, and there are many times where I've been interested in something and I've just emailed the person or even just walked up to their door and said, "Can you tell me more about this?" I go to a lot of just brown bag talks and things like that, and conferences make you aware of what the options are. But then a lot of young people don't realize you have to ask, or people will never, somebody in another department, another area is not going to assume you want to work for them. You have to get out there and make it known, you know, if you ever need some more help with this, I'd be interested in helping out, or going to your supervisor and saying, could we work out, could I carve out a little time to explore this area? I think they need some help. I've done that before outside of the Space Department. At APL. APL is a very flexible organization in that sense. So if your project isn't demanding 100% of your time, and you say, I really kind of want to go work on this UAV for a little while, is that something I could do? A lot of places are pretty flexible. I mean, it's different everywhere, but it takes a proactive approach from the young person, and then just talking to people.
Thank you, Kate.
Al, can I
Lee?
ask Kate a question? Kate, do you have a mentor at APL?
So yes, I was waiting till the mentoring question, but the first mentor I had at APL is a formal program, and I do it every year just because I figure it can't hurt to meet another person. But the first one is the one that really sticks out in my mind, and the first time we met, he said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I started to give the standard APL answer about systems engineering, and he stopped me and he said, no, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was completely taken aback, and I realized he cared about me as a person, as my career goals, not how do I see myself fitting within this organization. And that's where I went off on all the things I wanted. But the fact that suddenly all the walls came down, and it wasn't what can APL get out of me, it was what do you want out of your career? And I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought that he would care. And once he asked and I knew he cared, our relationship became very strong. I knew he was an advocate for me. We developed a bond of trust, and I think that is absolutely critical.
It's a great story.
Yep.
Let me pull on one other string here, and then I'm going to go to the questions that came to us from the audience. But around meetings and training, one observation that I would make is I think different companies and institutions do different things. So Lee mentioned Lockheed has a mentoring program. We also, in fact, will pay memberships in professional societies. It's obviously can be more difficult, depending on your situation, to have somebody come from the Midwest or the Far West or the South and travel to Washington to buy airline tickets and hotels, et cetera, for a week. Sometimes that can be challenging. But I would always remind people to take a look for what are the opportunities that you have locally. One of the things that we started doing some number of years ago were what we call lunch and learns, where we'll invite typically outside speakers who will come in and over a lunchtime, brown bag, occasionally I get generous and buy pizza, but and have someone give a lecture over a lunchtime, and people get to learn from that. Whether it's AIAA or IEEE or a raft of other professional societies, almost all of them have local sections or chapters and bring individuals in to speak. So there are lots of local opportunities, at least very early in your career, you should take advantage of. Oftentimes I'm disappointed that when I go to a chapter or section meeting of whatever professional society that it is, I'm oftentimes disappointed that the people in the room tend to be those that are well along in their career as opposed to the folks that are newer in their career, which is really a shame, because that's when, even if you have to pay for it yourself, you're out $20 maybe for a dinner, but that's really about it. Otherwise, there's really no cost involved. So I would encourage those of you that are younger to make sure you take opportunities of those, and for those of you that are further along and in the mentoring role, make sure that the younger folks are aware that those opportunities exist. And so I don't know if anyone else up in the panel has any other thoughts on education and training that might be ways that people can get it without ending up having to struggle mightily for all the costs it might take for other things. Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so again, I'm a believer in personal responsibility and organizational responsibility. If you get too much in one direction, then I think you get skewed. So in terms of young professionals, there's the International Astronautical Federation. There's a very active young professional, community. There's a community that Kevin Stube kind of heads. And so one of the things I say to young professionals is you can get together with other folks from around the world and, try to change the world. One of the issues, if it's training, if it's conferences, if it's, kind of work, get together, with other, folks and try to do that. I mean, a lot of the people I've seen in their career, a lot of my colleagues who I came in with, they were able to change the system because they were very active. And so you can, be part of AIAA. There's probably a young professional group here, asked to give presentations, asked to maybe have a panel of, YP perspectives and link together with other folks who are already doing it. So I think it's really to wait for the organization, to wait for society, to wait for leadership, to sometimes do something that's not there. You may be at a bus stop where the bus isn't running. So you got to really, you got to take it and move it a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to turn now to the audience questions. I would say that I've got sort of two different categories of questions here. There are a number that are very important issues involving engineering talent around some of the things that Dan talked about, K through 12, immigration, immigration policy for the country, infrastructure, and all those are very, very important, but they're a little bit off the basic focus of focusing on young professionals. So I'm going to go more towards the questions that are relevant to the specific subtopic that we picked here and solicit your thoughts on some of these. There's been a lot of talk this morning and this week of engaging the next generation and growing young professionals. However, I have seen and heard few, if any, young professionals involved in these conversations. Well, here's an exception. How will industry engage and, most importantly, listen to the younger generation and implement their opinions in their own careers? So where I go with that, we've talked a bit about how training and education and mentoring does that. But maybe Lee and Ed and David could share with us, what are some of the things that you might do to listen to the young folks for ideas in your workplace? And Kate, what do you do to inject your ideas and those of your colleagues into the workplace? So why don't we start with Lee this time?
Okay, and the question was?
The question is, what do you do to make sure that the ideas of the young folks get injected into programs or ideas for programs in your place of employment?
Oh, okay. Well, starting with the mentor can certainly understands the organization of the company and can open doors for the young engineer to go talk to this lead engineer, this project engineer, this program manager, and kind of introduce him, set the stage, and essentially just open doors for this young engineer to go talk to other people in the company.
Ed?
So, I mean, again, there's a lot of different, I spend a lot of time just making myself available. So this afternoon I'll be at Goddard for a project science program next week, or the week after that I'll be at Johnson for one of our training programs. And basically when I get in front of our folks, it's what's working, what's not. Tell me honestly. From the standpoint of the chief knowledge officer, to me, I'm looking at, are we doing things that make the culture better in terms of openness and communication? Are we doing things that get knowledge accessible to our folks? And are helping in terms of, again, how people network and the lie. But to me, it's one, making myself and my role accessible, and hopefully encouraging people to be honest. Related to that also, but again, I go down to personal responsibility, because I'm not a big believer in, if we wait for management, and I'm part of management, if everyone waits for management to do the right thing, I think it's a crazy burden. I get a call one day, we were doing a forum in terms of lessons of 30 years of shuttle. It was a cool program, great idea. I get a call from a young professional who says, I tried to put into this, my manager told me it's for people who've been in the system for 10 years or longer. And I said, that's crazy. I don't know exactly where the policy came from. It's my program, but sometimes policies happen in the system that you're not even a part of. But I heard that, and so we opened it up, and we ended up having about 10 young professionals. We had about 50 in the room, and it was a tremendous engagement. But I always remember the fact that it was that phone call of the person who says, you say that you're supporting young professionals, but here's lessons of 30 years of shuttle. Boy, wouldn't we benefit from that, and we can't get into the room. So again, I think managers, we try to make ourselves available, but sometimes people don't talk honestly in these sessions. You know, we want to say what's nice. But also there are phones, there's email, there's all these different things. Tell us, you know, what we're not doing, what we need to do. And in a lot of cases, you'll find people who can change things really easily.
Okay.
So.
And David?
I think the keys are to engage, to listen, and to act on what you hear. I run an engineering department, academic department, where the average age is probably just over 30, large number of assistant professors, 50% female. It's a quite different sort of academic department to most. With graduate students, we have them involved in deliberative committees to do with hiring the next group of graduate students. We're currently looking at faculty hires, and they're on that committee. So having a voice in the deliberative processes.
Great. So Kate, what do you do to get your ideas listened to?
So there are a few concrete examples I think everyone can take away right now. Sit at the table. If a lot of these conference rooms, they'll have the big center table and then there's chairs lining the room, especially women, but young people also tend to gravitate towards the outer ring. Having a manager or somebody just say, hey, why don't you join us at the table? That says, I value your input, please come join us, don't sit on the fringes. Also being comfortable asking questions. And there are different ways to do this, but a young person, a student, should always be able to ask questions. It doesn't have to be in front of the sponsor or the client, but the supervisor or the manager needs to say, you know, either ask questions anytime or after the meeting come up and let's go over the questions you had. It can take 5 minutes and it can make a huge difference, and it lets them know, lets us know, no question is too stupid. There have been times where I think, I don't even know what they were talking about that whole time, and I feel really silly asking it, and they say, oh, I'm so sorry I didn't explain that acronym. I should have done that. You should have asked half an hour ago, and I just sat there in the dark. So don't be afraid to ask questions. On the flip side, make it open so that anyone can ask questions, and sit at the table. Those are my two.
I'm going to make a comment on this one as well, but it's actually a comment that bridges very well between this conversation and the next question that we have, which I'm going to deviate a little bit from, I think, where the person was going with this. But they write, one of the U.S.'s greatest assets is the existence of an entrepreneurial environment. How can we use that environment to create opportunities for entrepreneurs to address our STEM shortage? Well, I'll focus that a little bit towards entrepreneurship and how we can use that in our workplaces to stimulate, you know, our young engineers, in fact, our engineers in total. And I'll share with you one of the things that we do at the Skunk Works is a program that we call Tech Seedlings. We set aside a small amount of our discretionary budget each year, and individuals come forward. We have a formal process by which this happens, but people come forward and make very, very short proposals where they say, I would like to do some work on something. The seedling is only $10,000, which doesn't pay for a great deal of time, but a little bit of time to sit down, think something through, maybe do a simple experiment, do some simple models, analyses, etc. And then those results are looked at, and some percentage of those tech seedlings result in larger discretionary funding, and then some of those actually end up resulting in funding that has come from the AFRL or the DARPAs of the world. And I don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head. They're obviously small in terms of percentages as you go through this, what I would call stage gate process. But the few that have gone all the way through the gauntlet have produced some really, really very exciting things that have produced some really dramatic results. So I would encourage those of you in here that have some control over discretionary budget to think about ways that you can use very small amounts of that on a very, very open sort of playing field to allow people to do those things. So with that comment as a bridge, other thoughts from the panel about how you might use entrepreneurship in your setting as a way to help stimulate people getting ideas in and generating new work. So we'll start with you, Kate. What have your experiences been in being able to be an entrepreneur at APL?
We actually have a very similar program where they'll have these challenges and you can win up to about $10,000 to go work on almost anything. Some of them are just internal, how do we make our shuttle bus more efficient, to challenges that we can take to our sponsors. But a lot of it for me is the global environment is so entrepreneurial entrepreneurial right now, that I see a lot of my friends from college who are starting their own companies and becoming successful, and that's an interest. So far it hasn't really aligned directly with my own career goals and where I am, but there's a lot of outside influence pulling people towards, hey, you want to come start a company with me?
Any of the other panels? Ed?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's somebody. So how many in the audience are young professionals? I mean, okay, so about 25% or so. I mean, I think, so one of the advantages of when I remember when I was young at NASA is I had about 10 years, those first 10 years, where I can do things and I can say things, and people were comfortable saying, well, that's not the way we do it around here, but you're young, so you'll learn. And then you get to the mid-career point where people start saying, you know, Ed, you got to the point where you should know better, so cut that stuff out. And then you get to that tier where you start censoring yourself. So one of the advantages of those first 10 years or whatever is that you can kind of be funky, you can do your own thing, people expect it, and they encourage it, and you can get away with it. So I'd use it as a license. Related to that, I would look to link with others. And one of the things in the country that there's tremendous, in the world there's great advantages of is AIAA in terms of folks, in terms of project management. There's the Project Management Institute, there's NCOSI, there's the IAF. I mean, and all these have young professionals. I would go to AIAA and I'll say, this is something we would like to do, and I would go to the organization in case of NASA, and there's very active YP groups, and I'd get together with others in terms of how you want to change the world and how you want to, have the organization look for what it should be. Because again, those first 10 years are golden. Because again, I always valued, I look back longingly on the ability to do things, and people saying, well, he's young. And, so take advantage of it, while you can. It's a general kind of a theme, but it's a theme I see. There are so many opportunities out there that if you feel left out or there's not a case, then you're not asking, or, you go ask me. I mean, I'd get Kate after, what are you doing at APL? Or, folks, you can get in touch with me in terms of NASA, ehoffman@nasa.gov, or other colleagues. But, you gotta, it's stirring it up.
Great. Lee, I saw you.
Yeah. Most companies have a business development organization. And these people have money. And so what you need to do is you need to let it be known in the engineering community that you're looking for new ideas. And and you're open to any crackpot idea that any young engineer might have. And so you get this idea from this young engineer, and you kind of talk it over a bit, and you put it together. Then you go to business development, you get some money, you do a little bit of analysis, maybe a demonstration, and pretty soon you got something that the BD organization can take out and sell to DARPA, AFRL, ONR, whoever. One that comes to mind was I had this young engineer who was really a crackerjack radio control nut. And he came in one day and said, what if we put a hand grenade in a model airplane, and we put a little camera in the nose, and we fix it up so we could fly around, find the bad guys, and then home in and crash on the bad guys and blow them up. And so I went to BD. He and I went to BD with this story. We got $500, and he bought a model, and we put a firecracker thing in it, and he demonstrated that this thing that was workable. And today, we are marketing that thing through, I think it's AFRL. But anyway, there's a lot of room for this entrepreneurship. And all you need are the good ideas and a little bit of money, and you got it made.
Okay, David?
Could I just return to the comments I made at the beginning, which was, consider your career as a startup company that continues to be a forever startup, a continuous beta. And that will lead you into all sorts of places, which will then lead to entrepreneurial opportunities wherever you're working. So take it to heart as the way you run your career.
Okay. See, the next question that we have, to summarize it, is that a lot of our dialogue seems to have been focused more towards larger institutions with larger amounts of discretionary resources, perhaps. And what about folks that work in the small business world? And I would start there and say there's actually at least as large, if not a larger opportunity space in a small company, but how you get there is just quite different. And I say that from the perspective that over my career, probably more of a conversation over a beer than I would have here, why this had happened. But I've been involved in a number of startup companies, some that have gone public, some that have gone bankrupt and have gotten me sued along the way. But nevertheless, I've been in the small company environment by association. And one of the things I would say with small companies, and for those of you that do work in small companies, is you are not restrained by a lot of the regulatory requirements by law that restrain us. There are all sorts of differences in laws about companies that are below certain sizes defined by the Department of Labor, application of FARs and so forth. They give you an advantage. So for example, you have a huge amount of flexibility in your time that one would not have here. So for example, if you want to go off on a weekend on your own time and do something, and writing a proposal or putting something together, you can do that. It actually becomes problematic in large companies for you to go off and do that because of the reporting requirements and how you have to account for time. In small companies, one of the best entrepreneurial places to get out new ideas is through the SBIR program, Small Business Initiative programs. You know, and every one of the agencies, NASA, Department of Defense, Department of Energy, has these programs that are designed just for small businesses, and large ones are not allowed to play. Although you can oftentimes, through an SBIR or a twin called STTR, you can get a large company or an institution like APL to partner with you with it, but that gives you an avenue that is very well funded to pursue new ideas that are not available to those that work at larger companies. I would say that your opportunities to go to those local chapters of the AIAA and get ideas from the outside are completely unimpeded by no matter what company, kind of company that you happen to work for. And I would say that I think all of us recognize the entrepreneurial value of small companies. And I've never heard of a member of a larger company, university, and FFRDC, that if you ask them to stop by and do a brown bag lunch for you at your small company, they won't do it. They almost always will. So there's a different spectrum of opportunities in the small business world than some of the things we've talked about here, but there's certainly ones that you can exploit in that regard. So, given that comment about small companies, other thoughts on how you maybe have engaged in your institutions at small companies? Maybe, Ed, maybe your national and SBIRs, you can add comment too.
You know, we're living in the age of social interaction. You know, I mean, I heard about the Twitter, and, you know, I was just thinking maybe I should just start throwing things out there, but I wouldn't be able to accept, you know, anything anyway. But, you know, when I was at school, I went to professors and I said, you know, where can I get work, or how can I get into, you know, different kinds of programs? When you're at NASA, you talk to different folks or friends. So it's, and I think it's about the social interaction to be able to get what you're looking for. And all the organizations up here have different people. I think a common theme has been, if you talk to people, you'll find the person who will lead you to the other person, to the group, and I think that's the, you know, that's the real nature. I think the danger I see, and I've seen in what I've done, is where people feel that there's going to be somebody coming to help them. There's going to be a manager, or there's going to be some kind of a formal thing that shows up and gets them on the career. That I don't think typically happens. It's the relationships, and so I think whether it's in school or NASA or any place, it's you got to talk to more and more people about this is what I'm interested in. And you know, if I'm interested in battery technology, then I'd say I'm interested in battery, and you'll find people and they'll lead you, and it zooms.
Other comments from the panel? Lee, David, Kate?
No.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to make this the last question here. We're about approaching 20 of the hour, and I want you all to have a chance to stretch your legs, get some coffee, and get to the next session. And someone finally asked what I would call the elephant under the table question. And the elephant under the table question is, leaders and young professionals often agree on development philosophies, but middle management is the real limiter. I shouldn't have to go to the VP of Engineering to find support for SciTech. How can we address this, and should the young professionals just go around their managers to the VPs? You could do that. It's probably risky, and it's probably would be viewed as a little bit self-serving. But I think you're right. I think maybe it's just a matter of time that the senior leaders grew up in a time when there was more encouragement to participate, perhaps, than there is today in middle management to do these things. But I think the better thing to do, rather than in a self-serving way, go to your VP and say, I want to go to this conference, my manager wouldn't let me do it, would be to maybe have the young professionals as a group express an opinion to senior management that they're not getting support out of middle management to do this, and let the company decide, or the organization decide, what sort of resources, what sort of policies it might need to put in place to make that all happen. But I think that certainly is an issue. The middle managers are the ones that are held accountable for actually producing and generating the things that will bring in the contracts or the work that lead to work. So I think it needs to be worked across all levels and not by a couple of pairs of levels trying to work this out. But I think truly that's an issue that I see happening in lots of organizations. In fact, I hear it even in my own. So other comments on what you might have been able to do to make this help? Lee?
That is a real problem. I see it all the time. The VPs, the directors, these are the men with vision. And the middle managers, you sometimes wonder how in the world they got promoted to that position. They're just a speed bump. And so the young engineer, he's frustrated. And that's where your confidant, your mentor, can be a really big help, because the mentor can hear your frustration and can somehow figure out a way to get around that middle manager to the VP. But no, it's a real problem. And you just have to, you just can't go around your manager by yourself, because that's kind of career limiting. But if you can get some help from your confidant or some other good friendly engineer, sometimes you just got to do it.
Other thoughts, David or Ed?
I could talk all day on this. So first, there's a vast difference in saying, I really want to go to this conference, please can I go? And I'm interested in attending this conference, here's what I think it will offer the firm, or I really want to showcase our abilities, or I want to present a paper. That's a huge difference in just, please, I really want to go, I love conferences, versus here's what I want to contribute and what I will bring back to the company. The other maybe kind of sneaky thing that I've learned is if you do have the support of the higher up person, you don't want to bypass your middle management, that CC is a beautiful field on the email, and you can just CC the other person. And if they're quick enough on the trigger and they say, I think that looks like a great idea, then your management, you've asked your management directly, but with that little CC to the higher ups giving support, it's a lot harder for them to say no.
So I'll comment on that. I think that's not really an accurate kind of issue. I think middle management usually has to do the heavy work that senior leadership doesn't want to do. I mean, senior leadership gets up front, says we love our people, we support them, we believe in training, and then they impose a 40% cut, and middle management has to deal with it. I mean, so, but I don't think it's evil. I think we have, you get into a management chain largely, there's a certain element of being chicken. Where you see all the things that create problems. You see a year and a half ago, I'm watching NBC News at 7 o'clock, and I see the GSA conference scandal, and I said, I know that tomorrow at NASA, any word of conference is going to be, because we become chicken, and we want to be safe. We want to do the right thing. But I think the way to do that nowadays is engagement. And I don't really believe in trying to work around. I've done it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But I think it's the engagement of what's important to the organization. And I think it's important that, if we're talking about young professionals, I think any workforce, you got to say, I get in front of a lot of folks at CKO and I say, what do you think? And I don't hear anything. Or I say, what are the problems? No one wants it, because we don't talk about it together. But I think, that voice, that discussion, that dialogue needs to be heard, senior leadership, mid-level management, and then the constraints we have, how do they get laid out there? Otherwise, we get into a middle management won't do this, and and all that kind of stuff, kind of a thing. So,
And I'll just add to it that this idea of what's the value proposition, and not just to the individual, but to a collection. For this group of people, as part of mentoring, as part of everything else, what's that value prop? Then the middle management may or may not be able to use that, particularly if it comes collectively, to leverage further up. It helps, gives them some shots to fire further up the food chain.
Lee, did you want to make one final comment before we wrap it up?
Yeah. I'll share with you the secret of succeeding in aerospace. Okay? Write this down. Make your boss look good.
Yep.
And so if you can get to your middle manager boss and convince him that you know how to make him look good, and the way you make him look good is by doing this and that, going to this conference or whatever, pretty soon he'll buy in, and you'll have a middle manager that's kind of on your side. But tell him you're going to make him look good.
Good. Okay, well, thank you all in the panel and in the audience.
Thank you.
And as we depart, I have a token of appreciation for each one of our panelists, and the AIAA coin.
thank you.
Whoa.
Thank you.
Can we take it to the bank?
You can take that.